MTJ back in victory lane, and you've made it to the most important NASCAR betting stop of the day, the Money Stop. He's Cole Cusumano, I'm Steven Cusumano, and we are presented by Kickin the Tires and SharpLink Gaming. And by the way, before we even get into anything, Cole, and talk all about the masterclass that we had here on the Money Stop and for Martin Truex Jr. himself, Kickin the Tires president Jerry Jordan will be participating in a public service initiative for the National Auto Body Council, teaching first responders about emergency extrication from vehicles.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. He doesn't know if he's going to be the one being saved or the one doing the saving, but he said you can find out on July 29th when he's doing the demonstration out there in Houston. And I am told there is a possibility there will be a video of this this occurrence. So I'm hoping for that. I want to see what Jerry's doing over there, and it should be a good deal. I'm excited for them.
That should be exciting. It's probably about a week from the time that you're listening to this podcast, and boy, if you listened to the podcast last week, you're very lucky. It was a masterclass for Martin Truex Jr., an absolute feat of dominance, as we kind of predicted this would be for either him or Christopher Bell. Truex was my pick to win, and to that same token, Cole, this was a Money Stop Masterclass. We had, out of our 12 drivers that we discuss, we had 7 of the top 10, and I think 8 of the top 11, but we'll go through it. Martin Truex Jr., though, first immediate takeaways. I mean, for me, Cole, as he dominates and wins at Loudon, there's absolutely no one that should be picked at a short track in the next-gen car short track package other than Truex. Like, you're literally missing out on money if you're missing that memo.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. This was just a classic Martin Truex Jr. Monday win, utter dominance, and I think at this point in the season, he's probably the most complete driver and team right now in that 19 crew. James Small is looking like one of the best pit crews in the garage area, and he is. I feel like he gets overshadowed a lot by the bigger names, but he's just a mastermind in his own right. And again, this team is just competing at such a high level, and it's so weird to think about that we were talking about MTJ possibly not even returning in the 2023 season. So this team is just clicking on all cylinders. I think they're the favorites for the championship, sitting through 20 races. But overall, Loudon, I mean, it is what it is. I would say for a New Hampshire race, it was pretty solid. You had MTJ lead the entire time, but there were quite a few comers and goers. There were some drivers that were running towards the back end of the top 10, top 15. They were able to rally to finish in the top 10 or top 5 and whatnot. And I think these are definitely the dog days of summer for NASCAR, beginning with Loudon, obviously. You're going to a handful of tracks in Loudon, now upcoming Pocono, then you got Richmond and Michigan, where it's a lot of green flag racing. There's a lot of strategic mindsets that need to get pulled out in order to execute these races and get quality results. And in my opinion, while the product might not be as compelling to watch on TV, this is what lays the foundation for the postseason coming up in 6 races. And I think that's why you're going to see guys like MTJ, Kyle Larson, William Byron, and even Denny Hamlin step up and kind of string together those quality results after going to tracks with a lot of uncertainty, like the Chicago Street Course and Atlanta Motor Speedway. So I'm looking for a lot of consistency and a lot of those guys with championship caliber teams and such to really perform in these next 6 races.
I mean, yeah, you hit it right on the head. This is the point of the season where you start to steamroll for the playoffs, and those teams that really know how to peak at the right time, like Hendrick Motorsports was so good at doing with so many years, and the 48 team and Jimmy Johnson. This is kind of the time where you start to hit your strides. You go to the bread and butter tracks where, like you said, there is a lot of green flag racing, not a lot of very fluky winners. And as we go to Pocono, I expect a lot of the same. Looking at our top 10, though, Cole, from this race in New Hampshire, the Crayon 301, Martin Truex Jr., of course, the winner. But again, it was a who's who of drivers that we pinpointed to be in contention for the win elsewhere in the top 5 and top 10. Joey Logano, who was actually second on my list of drivers I thought was going to win, he wound up in second place. Kyle Larson wound up third. He was another one of our favorites. Kevin Harvick, one of our sleepers, was fourth. And Brad Keselowski, one of our sleepers, or he might have been a favorite, I don't remember. But regardless, the top 5 was all drivers that we predicted would finish in the top 5. Tyler Reddick was one we did not. He wound up in 6th and was, a Toyota nonetheless. So that was something that even in itself, we discussed that we expected dominance from the Toyotas in this race, and really it was just a Martin Truex Monday Masterclass. And then 7th would be Denny Hamlin, one of our sleepers. Bubba Wallace wound up 8th. Austin Dillon 9th, and then your sleeper for the win, Chase Briscoe rounded out the top 10. So I think, again, we're going on several weeks in a row now, and really a season's worth of pretty good success of looking into the numbers that we know are going to reflect at tracks like New Hampshire. And again, this is at every track we go to, but I think that these short track package races have been the most easy to predict from a betting perspective, and I think you can probably say the same.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I think looking at our results I have listed here for the top 10, I think we have 6 of our 12 drivers, so half the drivers mentioned in that top 10. And I was keeping tabs for a majority of the later stages of this race. I noted it 85 to go, and I think all the way down to even 35 to go. We had 8 of the top 10 drivers predicted from this past episode. So I think you're on the money in saying that we have our short track analysis down, Pat. And I'm just so pumped to get to Pocono because I think, factoring in what we saw at Loudon and all through these first 20 races, we're really hitting our stride. And I think the results are going to keep piling on and the money is going to keep stacking up because we're doing really damn good here. I got to pat ourselves in the back for this one.
Well, as we continue to stack pennies here on the Money Stop podcast, let's talk about nickel or dime. This is where we go through all of our paint schemes at the upcoming race, and we're going to give out a couple of dimes and then one nickel, which would be 2 basically 10s out of 10 and then a 5 out of 10 out of the paint schemes that are new to this week. And there's a lot of pretty good ones this week, Cole. One of which we actually discussed last week or 2 weeks ago at Atlanta, the Gainbridge number 77 Spire Motorsports car, which 2 weeks ago was run by Corey LaJoy. This week it's the 77 for Ty Dillon. Great paint scheme, but I'm not going to give it a dime just because we've already discussed it on a previous episode. One I do really like, though, is the other Spire Motorsports car, the 7 of Corey LaJoy, which is a TD Bank car. I really like how the design of the green diagonal sign is kind of in line with the white number 7 that's just to the left of the window net. So it just angles-wise, it works out well, and the TD Bank logo looks really good underneath the door there. It's just a pretty sleek-looking car. I'll give an honorable mention to the number 12 of Ryan Blaney because that's a car that was one of our Silver Dollar Award contenders last year, and it looks like it may have a little bit of a different perspective on it this year, maybe a little bit more yellow, but I could be reading too much into it. That's just one of the nicer cars we see at any track. And then there's a couple other good ones to choose from, Cole. I know you're going to like the 19 car that MTJ is bringing this week, but I'm going to go with the 48 Ally car, which is always a big hit. The Best Friends paint scheme, which is a tribute to the dogs that Alex Bowman is trying to save, and it's got kind of like a orange and purple and pink sherbet going back to the white of the car on the back. So it's always a cool look. It's always for a good cause, and those would be my 2 dimes this week. If I got to give a nickel, I'm going to give it to the 22 of Joey Logano. And this is a Verizon car. It just has nothing on it. There's a big Verizon check mark on the side of it, but the entire base of the car outside of that is red, and there's literally no design. So, maybe simplicity is what they were going for here, and if it was, then a job well done, but it's literally just a red car, so I'm going to give that a nickel because it's not creative enough for me.
Yeah, I agree with what you just said. And this is actually a really great week for paint schemes. I'm really surprised. Lots of oranges, lots of greens, and front and center of the graphic, there are actually 3 dog-sponsored cars this week, which I'm a massive fan of. You mentioned the Ally Best Friends one. I'm going to give my 2 dimes actually to the other dog cars. The first one being Michael McDowell's number 34. It's a Benabone car. It's a green base. The front half of the car is a light green fading into a darker green gradient towards the back half of the car. And it's very simple, very clean. I love my greens. It's a white number 34 with a dark green outline. There's some dog bone graphics and bones underneath the Benabone logo, which goes diagonally from the back of the 34 to right above that rear wheel behind the gas cap. And then the 47 is Stenhouse. I like this car a lot, actually. His dog is actually on the car behind the number 47, so that's automatically a dime right there, bonus points. But I mentioned last week how JTG was up in their paint scheme game. This has to be their most complete paint scheme yet. It just looks really awesome, really cohesive. Color scheme's great. It's a dark blue, a light blue, and some white in there. The 47's white outlined in a dark blue, and then a lighter blue outline beyond that. Right next to his dog is a giant Blue Buffalo logo. There are some products of Blue Buffalo behind the rear wheel, and the hood is also what really got me to give it a dime too, because the JTG cars, they have the logo placement on the hood like either way down, pushed down, or way pushed up. This one's centered. It's got a really cool Blue Buffalo logo with a bunch of diamond shapes around it. Just a great looking car. And I totally agree with your nickel for the 22 of Logano. And kind of in that same vein, I'm going to go with the number 10 of Eric Almirola as my nickel. It's a strictly blue car with a white number 10 outlined in blue. And it's just sponsored by Ford. Not even like the blue oval Ford logo. It just says Ford in like, I don't know, like an Arial black font. It looks just way too basic. There's some jagged lines going along with the body lines of the Mustang, but it just looks way too basic for my liking. So those would be my two dimes, my two nickels for this week.
Yeah, like you said, this was kind of an underrated week for paint schemes. I got to give an honorable mention, too, to the 45 for Tyler Reddick, because it's always cool to see the Jordan Jumpman logo on that car. And the colors, I'm sure they have some kind of meaning. I haven't actually gotten a chance to look up why it's the dark green and the red and the white, but they just, I don't know if they clash as well to me, but again, I'm assuming there's some meaning there that's beyond me, but I always like seeing the Jumpman logo on that 45 car. As for how the cars are going to line up on track at Pocono, we're going to figure that out. Qualifying on Saturday, 3:20 p.m. Eastern Time on USA Network. And again, for any new listeners, I feel obligated to say this every episode. We're giving our analysis going into qualifying, which, for the record, has been very accurate this year. But it's very important, especially for DFS purposes, to take qualifying into account based on what we say and taking it for what it's worth, based on who the favorites are entering this week's race and what we like heading into Pocono. But the odds per SharpLink Gaming and BetMGM pre-qualifying this week, they are predicting more dominance from Joe Gibbs Racing as the co-favorites to win are last week's winner, Martin Truex Jr. and Denny Hamlin at plus 600. Then you have co-favorites at the third best odds, the two Kyles, Larson and Busch, plus 700, and William Byron at plus 800. So you've got a couple of Chevys in there as well. And I guess, Cole, I would probably tend to agree. I think Vegas has it probably right this week with how good the Joe Gibbs stable has looked recently, and the fact that Hendrick is always a team that's a force to be reckoned with. And as we kick off the favorites category, our four favorites, Cole, are four of the drivers from that top five in the Vegas odds.
Right, and I'll kick it off here with the two drivers you mentioned last week, beginning with our reigning winner, Martin Truex Jr. I mentioned it at the top of the show. The team is just clicking so well right now. Success just seems automatic. And again, this is just amazing to see from a driver who we thought was going to retire potentially this year. But James Small, can't say enough good things about him. He's just a master strategist who does not get enough credit. And in reference to Pocono, MTJ has 2 wins, his last coming in 2018, with laps led in 4 of his last 5 races there. He also finished 7th last year. Again, his odds are plus 600 for the win, and $10,700 for DFS, which is the most expensive in DraftKings. But the driver I'm looking at as my, I guess the best value in the favorites tier is going to be Kyle Larson, who I think is peaking into form tenfold at this point in the season. Coming off a 3rd place finish at Loudon, which was his 4th top 5 finish in 6 races, with an additional top 10 wedged in there. No average running position higher than 7th in those 6 races, which is very, very telling for me, because I mentioned how these are very strategic races, and in the case of this 6th race stretch, a lot of unknowns with the diversity and all the different track types. So to see this team not run top 10 and get those results, and mainly top 5s in that regard, is it's again very telling, and it's a sign of where this team is trending at this point in the season. And I think going into these next 2 races, Richmond and Pocono, these are 2 tracks where I looked for the 5 team and Cliff Daniels to kind of hone their skills and show the rest of the series that they're for real and they're here to contend for the championship, no matter how they performed these first 20 races. But in reference to Pocono, in driving for HMS, he has not placed lower than 9th in 3 starts, with a runner-up in there as well. He finished 5th there last year with an 11th place average, and he's currently riding a 4-race top 10 streak at Pocono, consisting of 3 top 5s, 2 of which are a current streak. His values, again, are plus 700 for the race win and $10,300 for DFS.
Both great picks. I agree with you that out of our favorites, Kyle Larson's definitely the best value, because I'm going to give you the second and third highest price drivers in terms of obviously the odds and daily fantasy. Beginning with the second most expensive daily fantasy driver, that's Denny Hamlin. And obviously, you go to Pocono, you want a driver who's done well here, because as we discussed very early in this episode, it's a track where you know what you're going to get. It's one of those that's going to have a lot of green flag racing, and the drivers who have had this as one of the bread and butters of their resume on the circuit, it's going to stay that way. And look no further than the winningest driver at Pocono, Denny Hamlin, who has 6 wins here, the last of which came in 2020, an asterisk obviously in 2022, but at Pocono for Denny Hamlin, a 64% top 10 rate and over 800 laps led in 33 starts, and he's led laps in the last 8 Pocono races consecutively. So I feel like Denny is a really safe pick this week. He's at plus 600 for the win, which again is co-favorites with Truex. And if you needed a little bit cheaper of a driver, he's only $100 different from Martin Truex Jr., so there's not really a ton of a difference with Denny at 10,600 in daily fantasy. So basically pick your poison. I really like Denny a lot this week. I know that this track is, again, in his wheelhouse, and it's one that he's always been consistent at, no matter what. And speaking on consistency for this year, Cole, Kyle Busch had a 7-race top 10 streak, snapped last week, coming off a rough day in Loudon, and he's looking to rebound because, again, talking on his consistency, that team was putting together some really good consistent runs in a row entering Loudon last week. But he had a nice top 2 streak going at Pocono until he was disqualified last year. But regardless, has 4 wins total at this track, the last of which came in 2021, and led the most laps in 2 of the last 3 Pocono races, which of course coincides with the next-gen car era. So he's also led laps in 13 of the last 14 here. Kyle Busch plus 700 for the win, and 10,500 in daily fantasy is, again, an extremely similar value to the drivers ahead of him and his former teammates, Denny and Truex. So I'm a big fan of this favorites category. It's kind of 4 drivers that are similarly valued by Vegas and by the daily fantasy prices. So pick your poison. I think there's very valid reasons to pick any one of the 4, but I do agree with you that if you're looking for the best value of the 4, it's got to be Kyle Larson.
Yeah, absolutely. And I also wanted to throw in here as well, if you weren't comfortable picking any of these top 4 drivers for both the odds and DFS, the 5th most expensive driver and the 5th best in odds is going to be William Byron at plus 800 and then 10,200 for DFS. And I also have no problem sacrificing some more money for him, just because I was kind of between Denny and William Byron for that final spot in this favorites category, but I gave the upper hand to Denny Hamlin just given his success at Pocono with the 6 wins and kind of the win last year. But I also think that you look at this season as a whole, and there's no better team, maybe the 19 team, than the 24. And I think that Rudy Fugle is also, he's turned into one of the best crew chiefs in the garage area. I think collectively, the drivers that do good the entire season perform well at Pocono and these strategic type tracks. So I would also consider William Byron over someone like Denny Hamlin. But I think overall this is a pretty well-rounded favorites category.
Getting to the sleepers now, Cole, drivers that have a little bit more of an outside shot at the win, because again, favorites this week, pretty cut and dry. But looking at our sleepers this week, I'm looking at a couple guys that one of them has a win this year, the other does not, and I think it could be certainly his week potentially, and that is, first of all, Ryan Blaney, who has the win earlier this year, and that's a team that was starting to string together some pretty good momentum, but he's hit a rough patch the last month or so with 4 finishes of 22nd or worse in the last 5 races. Had a strong day going in Loudon last week and Atlanta the week prior. But Blaney, definitely that 12 team is trying to get some more consistent runs as they head towards the playoffs now that they are locked in. And he's got the win at Pocono, his first career win back in 2017. So a track that has a special place in his heart. And it's for Blaney a 13.1 average finish, which out of drivers that have 10 or more starts at Pocono, that's the 5th best average finish. So again, I'm looking in the same light as a guy like Denny Hamlin I discussed before. I'm looking at guys that have a consistent history at Pocono, because we know what we're going to get here. And he had obviously the last race at Pocono, he ended up being caught up in a crash, finished 33rd, but spent all day running in the top 5 with laps led. And even prior to that, finished 5th and 6th in the 2 races at Pocono. So Blaney's a guy that has run into a little bit of a speed bump over the last 5 race stretch. But again, Pocono's a track that, for a driver that at times in his career has been inconsistent, this track for him has been consistent. And I'm looking at those last few races, and even going back to his entire Cup career, top 5 in average finish, Blaney could be a really solid sleeper pick and with a good outside shot at the win, because there's been times where even in these past 5 races where that 12 car has been floating up front and, again, just can't be in the right place at the right time when it's all said and done. So we'll see if Blaney can parlay that into a good finish this week with the success that he has had there. Another guy that had success last week was Kevin Harvick, and he is, again, I feel like we're a broken record saying this, but he is a knocking on the door for that first win of 2023 and potential final win of his Cup Series career in his farewell season. But finished 4th at Loudon. He was one of my other favorites to win the race. He was a sleeper last week and paid off for us, and he led laps in Loudon after a tough 4-race stretch going into that, which is something that, again, we correctly predicted. At Pocono, though, for Harvick, he's got the 1 win, which came in 2020. And he has a top 10 rate of over 50% at this track with a 12.1 average finish. Last race there, spent all day running the top 10 and then got taken out in the collateral. He was basically the collateral damage in the Denny Hamlin and Ross Chastain fiasco. So Harvick with a finish the last time there that didn't reflect how well he was running in the top 10. He has 13 top 10s in the last 16 races at Pocono. And that includes 5 runner-ups and the win in 2020. So basically half of his last 16 starts there, he's run up front in the top 5, top 10 for 75% of those. So Harvick is another guy that, especially for daily fantasy, could be a really good pick this week because he's valued at $9,000, one of the cheaper sleeper drivers, and he's at plus 1,600 for the win. Could be one of the weeks that Kevin Harvick is consistent like he was last week, and I look for a solid week out of the 14.
Yeah, I like both those guys quite a bit. I think Ryan Blaney, the results aren't indicative of how that team has run in the last 2 weeks specifically. Ran up front and led laps at Atlanta, and then was running firmly inside the top 10 all day at Loudon before they ran over a air hose and had to restart from the rear of the field late in the race. So I think Ryan Blaney, he's been good at Pocono. He's always going to be good at Pocono, and there's that Penske power under the hood. How many times have we seen those Penske cars go to victory lane over the last decade or plus? And then Kevin Harvick, obviously, he's just pretty much automatic for a top 10 at Pocono. Case in point was the top 2 finishes in the last 16 races. That's just absolutely absurd. So love both those blue ovals. But I'm going to turn to a Toyota for my sleeper. I'm going to go with Tyler Reddick. And it's hard not to think about that 45 car when coming back to Pocono. Between Kurt Busch's incident in qualifying and Ty Gibbs' debut last year, where he finished 16th with a very strong day. I expect a lot of the same for this week, seeing as Pocono is another great track for Toyota. Reddick was awarded a second-place finish at Pocono last year, but also would have gotten a top 5 anyway had Hamlin and Busch not been disqualified. And he was also 9th in the race prior, so he's riding a 2-race top 10 streak at the Tricky Triangle. And speaking on value and such, I would definitely settle for Reddick over guys like Hamlin and Truex, just because you take out the disqualifications last year, and Toyota finished 5 of the top 10 spots, basically, which is really, really telling. And this is, again, a track that profiles very well for Toyota, and it's one that Reddick has performed very well at in both his Cup career and Xfinity career. So I think if you're looking to not spend all that money on Truex or Hamlin, Tyler Reddick and Bubba Wallace are both really, really great values for this week, and ones that I would definitely venture to put in there over those 2 drivers to kind of cut costs and build a more efficient lineup. For my final sleeper, I got to go with my man Brad Kay, coming off an incredibly gutsy day in Loudon, top 5 day, and it was just a great day all around for the 6 team. I would say it was their best effort all season outside of a super speedway, and also pretty cool. Outside of Truex, he was the only driver to run every lap inside the top 15 at New Hampshire. So a lot of positive momentum for that team coming out of Atlanta and now into one of his best tracks at Pocono. So we're coming up on 3 races now: Pocono, Richmond, Michigan, where Brad's very good at, and then we're closing out with Daytona for the regular season. And I look at this as a chance for Brad to take that next step and really go from being a top 10 car to now a top 5 car with a shot at winning. And coupling this with the fact that these next 2 races will be heavily strategic, I think Brad is going to be in line for some really, really quality days. He is one of the most intelligent guys on track. Obviously, Matt McCall's asserted himself as a really, really smart crew chief over the last few years. And again, how many times have we seen these Penske cars, and specifically Brad Keselowski, win these fuel mileage races? I think, obviously, that was with Paul Wolf all those years at Team Penske, but Brad, again, is a very intelligent driver. He knows what he's got to do. And I think beginning with Pocono, he's got 1 win, which came all the way back in 2011. He has a 60% top 10 rate and a 10.7 average finish, which is the best among active drivers with more than 10 starts at the Tricky Triangle. He did finish 14th last year, but in 2021, he finished 3rd with most laps led, and he was 2nd in that race. So I like Brad K a lot as a sleeper. I think he should be a good middle ground top 10 play. His value for the wins plus 3,000, and his value for DFS is really, really good. It's right at that average remaining player salary recommendation at $8,300.
Yeah, for Brad, I would expect honestly a similar day to what he had in Loudon last week, one where he hovers around the top 10-ish and maybe could get into the top 5, and who knows from there. But that's a pretty well-rounded sleepers category, and to be honest, we've been nailing the sleepers all year, obviously, but especially during this summer, our sleepers have been really successful. So Reddick, Keselowski, Blaney, and Harvick is a pretty well-rounded group there. And as those guys are certainly values for the win compared to some of the favorites, get into our value picks now, where these are definitely more so guys that are going to be DFS darlings for us, and drivers that don't have as good a chance at the win, but certainly they might have a pretty good chance at making you some money in other areas, including daily fantasy or prop bets. I'm going to start with another Penske Ford. I mentioned how I have a lot of confidence in Ryan Blaney. Just seems like that entire stable has picked it up a little bit as of recently, with, again, Logano finishing runner-up last week. We've seen some glimpses from Blaney. Austin Cindric had a solid performance. Disappointing season overall for Cindric, unfortunately, but he's still in Penske equipment, which, again, I'm taking a lot of stock into here. He's got the 1 win at Pocono in the Xfinity Series and 3 top 10s out of his 4 Xfinity starts there. He's also led laps in all 4 Xfinity starts at the Tricky Triangle, but finished 31st in his Lone Cup start there. So, again, the numbers aren't mind-boggling for Cindric, but, again, solid stuff in the Xfinity Series. He does have the win there, and I'm putting a lot of stock into the fact that he's driving a Penske Mustang and the fact that they've been on the upswing a little bit recently. And I'm just looking at values, and at $5,900 for a Penske Ford, that is a really good value for daily fantasy, regardless of, he could finish in the top 15, top 20 even, depending on where he qualifies, and that could be a pick that ends up winning you some money. So Cindric, a guy that I'm not overly high on, but again, just the fact that he's in his equipment, he's had success here in the Xfinity Series, it could be a week to look at Austin Cindric as a guy that might turn some heads at Pocono. Another guy that's trying to turn some heads without a shadow of a doubt entering the playoffs is another one of the bubble boys, and that's Daniel Suarez. He is 1 point out of the playoffs right now, and that's a team that now at this point, again, where early in the season you would have probably liked to have seen them go for wins, being that they're on the bubble now, they can points race, and to me, that makes them a pretty solid value because it might not be as volatile of a pick for Suarez as it usually is. He's had a very up and down season, very feast or famine. It's been the story of his entire season, including at New Hampshire. He has a top 15 average at Pocono, which is where he finished inside the last 3 races there. So he's been consistent here. He needs a consistent run. Finished 3rd here last year and had 1 runner-up from the pole as well, and valued at $7,700 in fantasy. I just think that as a driver that knows he needs to point race, and a team that knows they need to just stay with their heads above water, I think it's a solid value for a driver that's not going to wreck your lineup unless he gets caught up in a wreck, to be honest. I don't think they're going to go out, make any too brash, volatile decisions or strategy calls. Obviously, they would love to win, don't get me wrong, but the position they're in with, 7 races to go, 6 races to go, at this point, they need to rack up points. They need to rack up stage points, which you're going to get points for. So I've got my eyes on Suarez as a good value based on the position they're in the point standings, and I've got my eyes on Austin Cindric as a good value based on where Vegas has him valued. So it's two different sides of the spectrum, but those are two guys that for values I'm keeping my eyes on.
Yeah, those are two great values. I love Austin Cindric, a Penske Ford at $5,900. That's just crazy to think someone in that equipment could be valued that low. But I know the season hasn't really been where they would have wanted it to be for their sophomore year. And as far as Daniel Suarez is concerned, consistency is the biggest thing. They're 1 point below the cutoff, and top 15s their last 3 starts there, third place last year. Ross Chastain also led, I think, almost the most laps, and he was in line for a top 5 day prior to the Hamlin fiasco. So Trackhouse has run well there in the next-gen car. Suarez has been consistent, and that value is also really good because it's about $500 below that average remaining player salary recommendation, and that gives you a lot of flexibility to kind of build your lineup around somebody like that who's also in great equipment driving for Trackhouse. Speaking on the bubble, I gotta point to my guy Michael McDowell, who is riding 4 top 10s in his last 6 races with an 11.3 average in that span. This team has looked really, really competitive as of late, and I'm very impressed. They've been running top 10, getting stage points, and that's why he's been 16th in the standings the last 2 weeks, and he's +1 above the cutoff now, above Daniel Suarez. But he's coming off a nice weekend in Loudon. He was fastest in practice. He was a top 10 car all day. Didn't get a top 10, but a good day nonetheless. So a lot of positive momentum. And the team as a whole is just clicking a lot. And I think this is what I expected from this team going into 2023, because we've documented it time and time again whenever we pretty much bring him up on this episode, on the show. But this is a brand new team outside of his spotter. Travis Peterson's a brand new crew chief, and now the team is finally clicking through 20 races. Travis Peterson is really, really great on top of the pit box. He's very underrated, and he's been able to kind of flex his strategic muscles these past few weeks and really capitalize on some really fast cars. So I think if they can capitalize on the speed like they've been doing, they should be consistent top 15 guarantees, challenging for top 10s. And looking at Pocono, he finished top 10 here last year, actually scored his career best finish of 6th at Pocono. And he also has one more top 10 there as recent as 2020. So when FRM and McDowell had that recent resurgence, you look at Pocono as one of those tracks that's been one of his better ones all around since that turnaround. So I like Michael McDowell a lot, just speaking on his consistency in 2023 and how they've fared at Pocono in recent years. So I like Michael McDowell. His value for DFS is $6,000. So he's actually $100 more expensive than Austin Cindric running for Team Penske for DFS. And my final driver has got to be Eric Jones, who might be a bit of a surprise for this category this week, but not too much when I get to it right now. He has shown more than respectable speed with the results to boot as of late. He's riding back-to-back 11th-place finishes with no finish lower than 16th and 1 top 10 included in this 4-race stretch. So he's been very consistent, actually, very under the radar. And the good news going to Pocono, when Eric Jones is good at a track, regardless of how good his season's going, and at this point in this season, he's trending in the right direction. When he's good at a track, he is really good at a track, and that makes him a very reliable DFS driver when we do pick him on our shows. And you looked at Pocono as one of his best tracks by far. 7 top 10s and 11 starts, 5 of those being top 5s. He finished 9th last year, and that was also no fluke. He had an average running position of 11th with laps led and stage points, so just been rock solid at Pocono his entire career. He's been really, really good as of late, trending in the right direction. So Eric Jones is a very sneaky good value pick play this week at $6,700. Actually more expensive than Michael McDowell, who's been running in, I would say, better equipment at this point in the season.
Love both those picks. I mean, Michael McDowell has been, that 34 team has been one of the most impressive teams in the garage over the last several weeks in a row. And I think at 6,000, that is a 1,000% lock. I mean, that's as good of a lock as you can get for daily fantasy this week. And Eric Jones, too, at 6,700. That is a really great way to start crafting a DFS lineup. And that kind of gives away a little bit of what our DFS lineup will look like when we get to that in a few minutes. But first, we just named our 12 drivers, 4 sleepers, 4 values, which were McDowell, Jones, Cindric, and Suarez. And we also named our 4 favorites. And as we do every week, we've got to name 6 out of those 12, one from each tier for each of us. Cole, I'm going to go with Denny Hamlin as my favorite. I'm going to go with Ryan Blaney as my sleeper for the win. And Daniel Suarez, the Trackhouse Racing Chevy, as my third driver, my pick from the values. Because as much as we talked about what makes Suarez a good pick this week, he's also in the Trackhouse equipment. And that's something you can't overlook. So I'm going with the Penske Fords and the Trackhouse Chevys.
So for my favorite, it's got to be Kyle Larson, just speaking on those 4 top 5s in his last 6 races. In addition to riding a 4-race top 10 streak at Pocono with 3 top 5s in that span as well. Sleeper's got to be Brad Keselowski. I mean, coming off a really nice top 5 day at Loudon, he has the best average finish at Pocono and a 60% top 10 rate. I think you're looking at a top 10 day when you look at these sleepers, and someone who can contend for the win. He's definitely someone you think of in that category. And for my value pick, could definitely go either way. Both Eric Jones and Michael McDowell have been very consistent as far as values are concerned. But I'm going to go with Michael McDowell just because he has those 4 top 10s in the last 6 races with that 11.3 average, on top of the fact that he is right on that bubble, 1 point above the cutoff, and he needs to have a nice, strong, consistent day. He finished top 10 at Pocono last year with another top 10 as recent as 2020. So I like Michael McDowell as my value pick.
Well, those are good picks. I'm a fan of these 6 drivers for sure, but we're going to get into our big money bets now. So these are prop bets, usually top 5s, top 10s, ones you can feel a little bit more comfortable placing a larger bet on. So Cole, why don't you kick us off this week with big money bets?
All right, yeah, so first off, I'm very high on Kyle Larson, as you could tell. I just mentioned his top 5 stretch over the past few races. His value to finish top 5 at Pocono is plus 120, so those are awesome odds. I also like, as far as top 10 bets, Bubba Wallace to finish top 10, where he finished 1 year ago at plus 120 as well. And then Brad Keselowski to finish top 10 at plus 125. And then maybe not big money bets where I'm looking to put a whole bunch down, but just something I would consider. Eric Jones finished top 10 at plus 400 after he finished 11th there last year. And he's riding back-to-back 11th place finishes in 2022. And then Michael McDowell is plus 550 to finish top 10 at Pocono, where he finished 1 year ago. So, again, maybe not as confident as the Larson, Wallace, and Keselowski props, but Eric Jones and Michael McDowell definitely worth looking at.
Yeah, a little bit boring here because I had some of the same picks. I'm a really big fan of those last 2 as values. Like you said, not big money bets. Like, I'm not throwing $50 on those, but, those are very solid bets as far as if you want to have an outside chance of something that has a very realistic chance of happening. Jones and McDowell to both be in the top 10 is something that seems doable. I'm looking at top 5 bets this week because that seems where there looks like the best value. And I like the Kyle Larson one at plus 120. I think that Kevin Harvick has been really consistent this year and was one of our sleepers. He's plus 210 to be in the top 5 like he did last week. So I like that. I like Joey Logano at plus 225 to be in the top 5 as well. Just a few veteran drivers there that are in a pretty good price range in terms of daily fantasy and in terms of specifically the top 5 prop bets. And Ryan Blaney, another one of my sleepers for the win at plus 180 to be in the top 5. Not bad. I'm not crazy about many of those big money bets. I like the ones that you said more than the ones I said, to be honest. But there's some good value there if you look deep enough, like the top 10s for Jones and McDowell. So big money bets, there's always money to be made. And sometimes the best way to make money in NASCAR betting is in big money bets. So look at the prop bets. Let us know what you think. If you have one that you didn't hear that maybe you were expecting to hear as a really good prop bet this week, let us know on @the_Money Stop, Facebook, mostly Twitter, also Instagram. We'll get back to you with any questions you have. And again, this is all taking into account that the cars have not qualified yet. So we'll get into that. But Cole, let's now dig in to our daily fantasy lineup, because I mentioned we would probably show our cards pretty early with a lot of the names that we had going here. And there's a few unfamiliar names, and by a few, I'm really pertaining to just one. But I mentioned how a really good way to build your lineup would be by starting with Michael McDowell. He's our cheapest driver, $6,000 to lead off our daily fantasy lineup. And then our second most expensive was Daniel Suarez. I mentioned how he's not a guy that's going to tank your lineup because of the fact that they need to points race. Suarez is valued at $7,700 in daily fantasy this week. Then a driver we did not discuss, Bubba Wallace, who's valued at 8,500 this week. Team that's hitting on all strides, and they're also on the playoff bubble, so they've got a, again, points race, and you're looking for those guys that are not going to tank your lineup, get stage points, and then maybe they'll start in the back and get you some place differential points as well. And then also in that same price tier, Brad Keselowski at 8,300, one of the best values in daily fantasy, period, this week. And then two of the best priced drivers, Tyler Reddick at 9,200, our second most expensive, and Kyle Larson at 10,300 was the cheapest driver out of our tier one, our favorites. So we chose him to lead off this lineup, and there is an average remaining salary of 0 after that. So I think, Cole, that's a good mix of drivers that can go out there, lead laps, potentially win the race when you think about what Kyle Larson can do, what Tyler Reddick can do, but it's also a mix of some really good value picks, guys like Michael McDowell and Brad Keselowski, who are very savvy in the sense that they would be able to potentially have a shot at a top 5, top 10, based on how the race plays out, and then a couple guys that are points racing, in Bubba and Suarez. So it's a well-rounded lineup from that perspective, and I'm a big fan of just leading off the lineup with Michael McDowell there at 6,000. That is a no-brainer.
Yeah, I am extremely confident with this lineup. I think having Michael McDowell and Daniel Suarez as your base, being two guys that are literally 1 point in, 1 point out of the playoffs, is a good thing to start with because, like you said, they both got to be points racing, they both got to be consistent, and they both have been at Pocono and this season, I would say. And then, obviously, Bubba Wallace also looking to get inside that top 16. Is in that top 16, I'm sorry. So you have three drivers there running within 15th through 17th in the points. All need to have strong runs, and all have had strong runs at Pocono. Then you factor in Tyler Reddick, who had a third-place finish last year at Pocono. Brad Keselowski is one of the best drivers in the field at Pocono. And then Kyle Larson, who is just red hot with Pocono success. I think this lineup is absolutely awesome. I have no complaints. I think it's very well-rounded, and I think it's going to win a lot of people a lot of money.
Yeah, so one of our better lineups this year as far as confidence level, and every time we've had this feeling of confidence, it's usually worked out pretty well for us. As we go to Pocono, I'm excited to see how this race plays out with the next-gen car, and again, being that our longer tracks this year, the 1.5 to 2 miles, been pretty competitive, so we'll see how things play out. Let's get into our picks, though, Cole. This is the fun part. We're going to go to our race winner picks. We're each going to pick a winner and a sleeper, and we alternate. So you picked first last week with Christopher Bell. I actually picked my first race winner of the season with Martin Truex Jr. I've come close. I think I've got like 4 or 5 runner-up picks this year, but that was my first race winner, so finally can be happy about that. But for my winner, I'm going to go with Denny Hamlin. He is, again, co-favorite to win the race, and I think a lot about his overall success here, the fact that Joe Gibbs Racing has been the best team in the garage the past several weeks in a row, including last week, coming off a strong run for the 11 team. I think Denny is poised for a big week, and they got to start, like a lot of these veteran teams that we talked about up front in this episode, got to start catching fire in preparation for the playoffs. And I think this is a really good opportunity for Denny Hamlin to click off a win at Pocono. And as I picked my winner first, Cole, you have first pick at a sleeper this week after you pick your driver for the win.
Perfect. Well, I have to agree with you there. I think if a Gibbs driver wins this race, it's probably going to be Denny Hamlin. He was flat out dominant last year. The whole stable was at Pocono in 2022. And I just think he's got to be wanting number 7 back after getting it taken away last year. So Denny Hamlin's definitely a good pick. The consistency does scare me a little bit overall as a whole this season. But I think, again, if one of the Gibbs guys gets it done, it'll be Denny. My pick, I think you know where my head's at. I love Kyle Larson this week. I just think that team's clicking. I think they are red hot, and I think he's great at Pocono. And for my sleeper, we're looking at Brad Keselowski and down. And with that, I'm going to pick Brad Keselowski. I'm very confident in him this week. I think he should be good for a top 10 day, and I think starting with Loudon, you're going to see him challenging for more top 5s and then be considered a threat for the win as we get down to the playoffs here real soon.
Good stuff. I'm a fan of both of those picks. Obviously, 2 drivers we've discussed at length. And another one of those that is my sleeper, I'm going to go with Michael McDowell. Team that has just been, like you said, Cole, unbelievably impressive. Brand new team. We knew there would be growing pains. There was growing pains, but now that they have overcome those, they have come out as a weekly top 10 car. And again, there's no reason to think Michael McDowell won't be in the top 10 again. And I love that plus 550 to be up there. As a sleeper, pretty solid pick. So I'm excited for this race. Pocono, like you said, Cole, is a track that really it recognizes with those dog days of summer, like Loudon, like Michigan that we're going to go to soon, Richmond, tracks that in previous history, the last 10, 15 years, haven't been the most competitive, but I'm excited to see the action and the excitement that this next-gen package brings to Pocono this year because, again, we saw some fun last year with Denny and Ross Chastain, and there's no telling what you're going to see on any week this season in the sport.
Yeah, I'm pumped. I think last year we had a really, really entertaining Pocono race, and I think the racing as a whole has been just really, really fun to watch this year. And I am going to say it's a little bittersweet not being there, seeing as I went to Pocono for the first time in 2022, and that track is just awesome to attend live. But I'm looking forward to enjoying it from home. I think it's going to be a great race. And yeah, I think it should be one that people are keeping an eye on because much like Loudon, I think the teams that excel at Pocono are going to excel going into the postseason and likely through the postseason. This is a great measuring stick for the entire season to this point, and looking forward.
Indeed, should be a fun race. 2:30 green flag Sunday on USA Network, the highpoint.com 400. And again, take everything what we have to say for what it's worth, but you're going to want to take some stock into what we see on qualifying. 2:35 p.m. Saturday, and qualifying is actually after that. That's the practice time, 2:35. Qualifying at 3:20 on Saturday. So definitely take that into consideration with what we've had to say. We've had a really good string of success. We hope you've been on it with us this season, and especially recently. It should be another fun week. We're going to drop the jack on this, the most important stop of the day, the Money Stop. Follow along on social media at _Money Stop. We're going to have up-to-the-minute reactions, updates, and analysis throughout the week as storylines develop, and so will Cole on his personal account at Cole_Cusumano_. Thank you all again. We hope you continue to bank out with us. We're going to drop the jack here on the Money Stop, and we will see you next week.